Each life we incarnate into has a divine purpose. For the majority of people on this planet, their purpose has eluded them. We have become so distracted with the struggle to survive that we have forgotten what we are here to do. In alignment with the sacred laws of nature, the ultimate purpose of all existence is to create and evolve. We certainly do not incarnate into life with the intention to destroy. And yet, we have come to live in a very destructive world. As a result, there are many out there who feel lost or adrift, whilst knowing deep down inside that something is very wrong with their reality. Many people wish they could do something of value, anything that is purposeful, instead of having to submit to a system of slavery in order to survive. It is important never to let go of that feeling. That is your soul crying out to you, telling you that your life has value and that you do indeed have a purpose. The most important thing you can do in life is to recognize your purpose, and often that requires a lot of soul searching. Life indeed dishes out some pretty tough challenges, which will either move you closer towards your purpose path, or will give you great training for when you finally realize what it is that you came here to do. But more often than not, the very clues about your life's purpose are hidden in plain sight, woven into the very fabric of our existence. But we are so easily distracted by irrelevant details that don't really matter, that often we miss the very obvious right in front of us. It is because of our willful ignorance of anything that does not fit our preconceived ideas that the truth about the nature of our reality is so readily hidden in plain sight. This is a very deep and personal journey, which has come to be expressed in many aspects throughout my life. This is not just an attempt to retell a bunch of research and pass it off as my own, for I am very grateful and openly acknowledge all the many wonderful people that I have been given the opportunity to work with and to learn from in order to get to the point where I've come to know what I now know. This is a journey I was always destined to go on, and likewise, how I have come to know this information forms as much a part of the story as the information itself.
Your life.
Hello and good evening, everybody. I hope you're well wherever you may be on this planet. Today is the 4th of April. It is Saturday evening local time, and I guess it's Easter in most parts of the world, but tonight we're going to be celebrating that by actually getting down and doing a little bit of recapping on some of the information that I've been putting out here on Conscious Consumer Network. My name is Mel V, and I teach something called Dragonology. And I thought I would start the evening by recapping what I've been imparting on CCN for the last 2 weeks, because when we go on to part 3, things start to get a little bit funky. So to start off, we begin questioning what the accurate definition of myth and legend is. The definitions of legendary and mythological have been widely debated with no widely agreed upon application. So this obviously beckons the question, is mythology real? And interest in mythology has actually grown steadily through the last 100 years, and it has peaked in recent years as the Great Awakening has taken hold of people who are now empowered by the realization that myths are not just pre-scientific explanations of the world or childish stories made up in order to account for the forces of the universe. Rather, what we consider mythology provides some accurate insight into reality. Myths and legends exist in all societies and are part of the very fabric of human life, molding behavior, expressing beliefs, and justifying institutions, as often many superstitions, religions, and ritual practices are based upon them. And I do want to just bring attention to some of the drawings here, because if you've been through this course material already or you're familiar with some of the iconography that comes up, we'll just reference a few of them here. For example, this top left-hand corner, we've got what would typically be known as a griffin, which often had the front legs of a lion, claws like a lion, and the head and shoulders and wings of an eagle. Over here would be the winged serpent, dragon, Melusine type character, which typically comes up. But all these creatures, when we start looking at the different features, they actually all ultimately reference one creature. They've just been reinterpreted and redrawn in different ways. This is Pan, which comes up quite often, and you can always distinguish Pan usually by having cloven hooves, horns on his head, and normally carrying the pan flute, often to be found with younger boys and goats. This comes up quite a lot in Greek mythology, where you see the bottom legs actually becoming snakes, and sometimes they end in tails, and sometimes they end in heads. Now, Pegasus, or the winged horse, or the hippocamp, is normally drawn with horse-like features, but again, the same serpent-like, fish-like tail, which again finds its way onto the mermaid. So these are the various characters that have been referenced, reinterpreted, and relabeled constantly through mythology, so that we believe that they're all different characters or beings throughout history. And that just really adds to the confusion, because what we don't see is the continuous root which exists throughout our very history, which is in fact the root of the dragon. The Encyclopedia of Mythology defines myths as imaginative traditions about nature, history, and the destiny of the world, the gods, man, and society. They are concepts which deserve serious attention for what they mean to those who believe in them, and as statements about the fundamental issues in life. One of the disadvantages of the old use of the word myth to mean a foolish story or a false idea is the implication that myths are trivial. The reality is, in fact, the reverse. It is the things which people find important that find place in their mythology. Mythology largely comprises of that collection of old human stories that are widely regarded by the ignorant and the majority as fanciful tales of impossible heroes and gods of long-gone eras, which have been imprisoned in limited available lexicons of successive verbally oriented cultural histories. Even the use of the word myth or mythology limits the idea one can have of this cultural history by identifying it specifically with a particular era and cultural identity. So let's look at where the word myth comes from. Some people say the word myth comes from the Greek word mythos, meaning story, but that is actually not incredibly incorrect. But when you actually look at where the word story comes from, it's actually a serpent root word, as we shall get into. So having read a very interesting book called The Dragon Seed by Nicholas de Vere, who is in fact the head of the Dragon Order, in this book he actually states that the pre-Roman Christians practiced a religion of Mithraism, and this is where the word myth comes from. And of course, this is obviously the origination of the sun god Mithra. So I just want to point out a few things on this particular depiction of Mithra, because I always found this very, very interesting. There's a lot of similarities, and I'll point them out when you go into part 2, the similarities between Mithra and Phanes, namely normally standing on an egg or a moon. You notice they're either on a sphere or being hatched out of a cosmic egg, often depicted with a serpent wrapped around them, with wings, and a non-human face, although it's a human body. This has got sort of lion-like features, but the lion is a symbol of the sun, and the sun always masks the dragon. I beg your pardon, I've jumped away there. But I will show you in a minute just exactly how the sun allegory comes in. But the lion most definitely masks the sun, and the sun masks the dragon. So over here you can see a depiction of Mithra where they actually has the solar aureola around the head, which normally takes the form of a halo or can enclose the entire body. So when it's at the head, it's a halo, or when it's around the entire body, it's normally depicted as an aureola. But normally it's a luminous cloud of light, which is symbolic of the sun, and it normally depicts a holy person. And this has been used throughout every religion, whether it be Hinduism, Buddhism, Mithraism, Christianity. This common depiction of some kind of sphere, orb, glowing lights, or rays that come out from behind the head depicts a holy person, usually that are Porphyra Gentius or of the dragon bloodline, and we shall get into that in a minute. But Mithra is often represented with sun rays coming out of its head, and commonly referenced by the Latin term Sol Invictus, meaning the unconquered sun, the ruling sun. And Napoleon once said, history is written by the victors, which is why we have history being referred to as mythology, and that being relegated to being semi-dismissive, because that's the way it's been intended. Because history is always written by the dominant culture, which for the longest time has been the Roman cult. And many languages evolved out of the Roman cult's Latin, but Latin in turn evolved from Greek, which, there's many languages that feed into the Greek language, but Latin has been the language of the Vatican and of the Roman Catholic Church for many, many years, but you don't find it commonly taught as a first language, except perhaps if you are studying Catholic studies or live at the Vatican or are in fact indoctrinated into one of these secret societies, but it generally is considered a dead language or a hidden language. Philip K. Dick said, the basic tools of manipulation of reality is the manipulation of words. If you can control the meaning of words, you can control the people who must use those words. So, dragonology. Why I've chosen the word dragonology is because the more accurate term for past cultural histories would be to refer to it not as mythology, but as dragonology. Because, as I said, mythology limits it to one area of history. It relegates it to one religious belief. So, dragons are absolutely everywhere. And the patterns and similarities between dragons of distant geographical regions indicate that whatever the dragon race is or was, at some point, they were absolutely everywhere. Dragons were equally revered, worshipped, loved, and feared by almost every ancient culture of the past. And it's amazing how many depictions you can find, collections like these of people who have drawn different depictions of dragons from descriptions and research they've done, a couple of 100-year-old hand-drawn etchings here. But just amazing. These creatures have most certainly been the fascination of many artists and writers. Constantly comes up. Dragons have taken on many different forms, and cultures have interpreted these creatures in their own language, symbolism, and artistic representations. And here we've got what would typically be classified as a basilisk type dragon because of the cockatrice features, looking a bit like a cockerel, the hen or cock type features, but as well the same sort of chicken-like claws and feathers, but with the tail of a serpent. And that's always the dead giveaway, is the serpent's tail. Despite the fact that dragons have been represented in many different ways, the basic stories, themes, language, and symbolism tie together all these creatures across all different cultures of history. And again, this is a different etching, a couple of 100 years old, to the other one I've shown you, and you can see that there's a lot of detail gone into these things. People really thought about or had an idea of what these guys kind of looked like. But, you know, considering some of the differences between that and that, they didn't really, which is why I suppose it was easy to reinterpret them in so many different ways. And dragons do turn up in the skies in the form of the Draco constellation. And the very fact that we have even a constellation named after the dragon gives homage to the supposedly non-existent creature. The dragons turn up in Chinese astrology. Although the dragon is the only creature in the Chinese zodiac that is not an everyday, commonly found creature. In other words, you will always be able to find, say, a tiger in India, an ox pretty much anywhere, rats, people know what rats and pigs and dogs and roosters and monkeys are. We know what sheep are. Most of us have seen horses. Most people know what a snake is, but a dragon, okay. I don't think many people have actually seen real dragons, to be honest with you, although they do exist. Every other creature is a commonly found creature that you could probably locate if you wanted to. But try locating a dragon, one that's not like printed or, you know, an actual living, breathing, you know, dragon. They just don't exist. So, well, they do exist, pardon me, it's just not a commonly found creature. However, what is interesting to note is that it is said in Chinese astrology that every single other creature on the zodiac has features which belong to the dragon, or the dragon, at least to put it the other way around, has features of every single other creature. And what's interesting is you continually come across the theme of the dragon being again, I've jumped, the dragon being the creators of humanity. And it's almost like they're saying in this one, the dragon is the originator of all the others because it's got features of all the others. It gave genes to all the others. And I'm not saying that the dragon is the creator of all these particular creatures. It could just be symbolic allegory. But there is a lot of words such as genes and genealogy and stuff like that, which come up in the serpentine etymology, which we shall get into. So for those who don't already know, I was born in the year of the dragon, 1976, and I've always had a lifelong fascination with dragons, and this is something that I've had, you know, with me since a very young age, right back to mermaids, and always wanted to be, you know, able to go underwater for long periods of time and hold my breath and do all this, you know, things that you see in the films, but it just, you know, the story of Little Mermaid captivated me, and from a young age, I was acutely aware that in films like The Neverending Story and when we went to eat Chinese, we would always see dragons and I would always notice them and they were just absolutely everywhere. And in fact, I have a challenge out to anybody to please, if you find a Chinese restaurant where you can't spot a dragon, do let me know. To this day, I have never been able to find one. You'll always find it somewhere. And I do always check. It's completely synonymous for the Chinese culture. And this particular little guy over here is an extremely beautiful depiction of a dragon on the sacred 9-dragon wall in the garden of the Imperial Palace in China. And this is one of 9 dragons on this wall. And basically, the dragon is described as having 9 attributes. And then history talks about the 9 sons of the dragon. And this 9 plays out quite a lot because you have the same allegory turning up in the Lord of the Rings, where you have the 9 rings of the 9 kings, etc., and the ring lords, which plays into the history of the dragons as well. So it all gets very interesting. We'll cover that when we get into later dragonology lectures. Dragons turn up in medieval depictions pretty much all the time. Lots of very beautiful ancient scripts with hand-drawn depictions of dragons. Again, long serpent-like tails, wings, horns, the typical features that come with them. And if you want to go look it up on Google it, check out some of the medieval bestiaries, which have some of the most amazing collections of dragons. And what's interesting to notice is how many different incarnations they've taken on. For example, you'll find griffins, basilisks, and dragons, all referenced as different creatures, when in fact they are all in fact symbolic allegory of the exact same creature. Egyptian dragons. Dragons are often represented with serpent-like traits, such as the winged serpent, and this is very clear in Egyptian iconography. Very stylized, of course. This is very typical of Egyptian art. And one of the things that here becomes very obvious is, as I said earlier, erroneously associated with the dragon, you always find the sun symbolism, and right above the head of this particular dragon or serpent, winged serpent, you have the sun symbolism, and above it again is what I'd call a further symbolism of the dragon, which is the winged solar disk, wings on either side, with the pair of rearing cobras coming out the side, which are typically known as ureyas. Again, this is a very interesting picture because it points out a few very commonly reoccurring themes in this whole episode of dragons, which is plumage on the top of the heads, the wings on a serpent, and then this looks like someone down on their knees making an offering. This is clearly an offering pose. And you will, in a lot of these tombs and stuff, they've found these kind of vessels with the heart and organs and stuff inside of them. So this looks like a heart offering in a vessel to the dragon. And this sort of thing comes up quite a lot. So this is an ancient depiction on papyrus of a sacrificial offering being given to an Egyptian dragon or serpent god known as Apophis. Human hearts are usually kept in these urns and given to the gods as a sacrifice. Now here you start to notice the dragon and serpent etymology in the name of Apophis, all right? Ophi. The Ophi word, O-P-H-I, I shall go into this more. Ophi is a serpent word. This is where we start entering into the realm of serpentine etymology. And of course, we just spoke about obviously sacrifices, eating hearts, eating humans. This is one of the most commonly reoccurring themes, unmistakable themes, erroneously associated, these dragons eating human beings. And this is a depiction of the South American dragon known as Quetzalcoatl, which is a Mesoamerican deity worshipped by the Aztecs, Mayans, and several other indigenous cultures to the South American region. Quetzalcoatl quite literally means feathered, winged, or plumed serpent. Again, notice the plumage on the top of the head. Many sacrifices were made to Quetzalcoatl, and I must say the Aztecs are one of the most sort of vivid in leaving behind records of these sacrifices exactly as they happened, in less allegory than the Egyptians. And as you can see from this one, it's pretty clear what's going on there. The guy's being munched on. Australian dragons, known as rainbow serpent or rainbow snake. This Australian deity is described as a creator god according to Aborigine folklore and Dreamtime story. And I've had the pleasure of finding out quite a bit of this firsthand from several very interesting Indigenous tribal people from the Aborigine nations of Australia. So it's interesting to find out that even as far-flung corners of the world, you have the same stories coming up again and again, the same themes. And this is for me where I started to, after I started coming into contact with David Icke's material, I started to go, well, you can't really ignore the fact that these things are so prevalent and the same themes, the same allegory come up again and again. An example of this being the Javanese dragon, Antiboga, a long serpent body with wings and a crown. Now, this is the royalty theme starts coming in here because these guys are erroneously associated with royalty. And this, of course, is a Chaldean dragon. Beautiful. This is one of my favorite depictions. The African dragon, or a serpent deity, often referred to as a Chitauri, as referenced by Dr. Credo Mutwa, or the Nyoka, which is known as a creator god and said to be an instructor or expert, which will tie in with some of the allegory which came along in part 2. So coming up to Europe now, we have the Swiss dragon. And it's funny that I have to label them like this, but this is how people begin to identify that these things are absolutely everywhere. And this particular one happens to be a dragon, which is the emblem of the Swiss city of Basel, the home of the Bank of International Settlements. That is no accident, by the way. It's quite deliberate. And in fact, the reason it's called Basel is actually an allegory to the basilisk, which is the king of serpents. Okay, so Basel takes the name from the first part of basilisk. So again, that's why there is etymological similarity of Basel and basilisk, and we'll go on to explain what Basel and basilisk is. Italian dragon. The Bison, which is the dragon commonly depicted swallowing a child, is usually the originating from the coat of arms of the House of Visconti in Milan, but it turns up in a lot of interesting places. For example, it turns up on the Archbishop's Palace in Piazza Duomo in Milan in Italy. And, of course, it turns up on the Alfa Romeo logo with the red cross, which turns up quite a lot in dragon art and symbolism. Angels and saints slaying dragons. This is one of the most prevalent themes when it comes to dragons. These dragons were hunted or something because, throughout Christianic mythology, there's a constantly recurring theme of angels and saints slaying dragons. For example, St. George slaying the dragon, and again here, the red cross turns up as known as the cross of St. George, but it turned into many, many different other things, including the Maltese cross, the cross that's been used by the hospitals, because obviously the Knights of Malta were also known as the Knights Hospitalia, which started the hospitals, and of course then you've got this becoming the icon of the charity known as the Red Cross, but which are also in fact run by the Knights of Malta. It's all very incestuous, but what it ultimately is the Sun Cross. It's the solar cross. And again, this is erroneously associated with the sun, which again masks the dragon. One of the most famous stories of night slaying dragon is that of St. George and the Dragon, who is in fact the patron saint of England. And when I lived in London, there was St. George's Day was always a common day or a common excuse for everyone to go out and get hammered at the pub, quite like St. Paddy's Day in Ireland. And this is a lovely depiction of St. George slaying the 7-headed dragon of the apocalypse. Okay, and the 7 always comes up. But I love this depiction because what you've got here is a very beautiful etching of a mother goddess type figure, which, let's go through the various symbolisms associated with the mother goddess. A crown, often with stars floating around. Sometimes they'd be in a circle, but this one's kind of spangled all over the show. It seems to be floating above it. A full body aureola. Notice sort of like the light rays coming out all around it, sort of outwardly. So that's a full body aureola as opposed to just a halo. Then, of course, the wings, and then standing on a moon. And normally you would have a serpent under the mother goddess's foot. In fact, if that should look a little bit more like serpent, but I think that's actually the foot. But normally under the foot, I'll show you in going through some lectures in the future how you always find the mother goddess, Virgin Mary, standing on a serpent. Saint Margaret and the Dragon is probably one of the most fascinatingly ignored stories of dragons. I just think because stories of women are always relegated to, sort of the back closets in Christianic mythology. However, this particular story has caught the attention and captivated the imagination of many artists over histories, because I just seem to find so many incredibly beautifully, imaginatively well-rendered pieces of art of this particular piece of mythology. And St. Margaret's normally depicted with a certain colored cloak on, or whatever the color of the cloak is, it's normally coming out the mouth of the dragon. That's how you know it's this particular myth. The story of this particular myth, Margaret was captured, put in prison. A dragon appeared to her, supposedly the devil in the form of a dragon, ate St. Margaret, and she was so holy that she split the dragon in half and came out holding her cross. But no, that wasn't good enough for her captors, so they beheaded her anyway. Although sad and gory story, but that's the way it goes. And of course, the Saint Margaret transliterates into Saint Marguerite and the dragon. Again, notice the blue cloak and the blue coat coming out the dragon's mouth. Go and Google this one and you'll see beautiful depictions. Here we go, another one again. Saint Margaret and the dragon, the cloak coming out the mouth there. And this myth evolved over time and actually originated with, I think, an earlier pagan deity which revolved around the marine theme, which we get into at a later stage. But Saint Marina is indicative of that, and this is where we start to see this particular dragon myth evolving, where you have Saint Marina actually slaying the dragon instead of emerging from the belly of it, and it seems that she seems to be holding a hammer. This one seems to have quite human-like features, a human body, and although it has a forked tongue and horns and wings, it's starting to have a more anthropomorphized look as opposed to serpent look. And this hammer theme comes up quite a lot, and it is symbolic, of course, of the dragon bloodline. Much like the sword in the Arthurian legends, and much like the glass slipper in the Cinderella legends, or the Cinderella story, which I shall go on to explain in later lectures, the hammer in the Norse legends of Thor is very important, and this is obviously Thor and his hammer hunting Midgard the serpent, taken from an 18th century Icelandic depiction. So you can see these stories and myths were everywhere, and people were very fascinated with them and recorded them meticulously and beautifully in amazing manuscripts. So they were obviously very important. It took a lot to get these drawings rendered when you don't have the kind of materials you have today. So think about this. What would be important enough for people to go to all this effort? This typically is what we would call a woodcut. Okay, it takes a lot of effort to cut a piece of wood and then print with something like this. And there's a lot of detail. This is quite a really, really interesting looking dragon depiction. In fact, this is kind of a monstrous thing with claws and tails and spikes and all sorts coming out there. But can't even make out what creature it is in terms of it's trying to be represented by the face. The features are not clear. It's a kind of a a bit of everything there. But again, that theme comes in. You have many animals are supposed to put their representative features into the dragon. And that comes up, as I said earlier, in the Chinese mythology. So here we go into a little bit about the basilisk, as I spoke about earlier. But here is St. Michael slaying the basilisk, and this depiction over here is from the city seal of Zwolle from 1295. And Zwolle is one of my favorite cities in Holland. Absolutely beautiful. It's got an amazing basilica on it, which has many dragons depicted on the inside. Very interesting place. But basically, this depicts St. Michael killing the basilisk, and the etymological significance of basilisk, which obviously is a dragon or serpent, and basilisk actually in some texts will be referenced as the king of serpents. Okay. And basilisk obviously gave name to the city of Basel. Now, basilica, which is only given to certain cathedrals that are appointed by the Pope, it's a very special name, which it's like a knighthood of certain Catholic churches or cathedrals. They get referenced or named as basilicas by the Pope, and basically, again, that references the dragon. Basileus, the Greek word basileus, obviously means king. So you can see where all this lovely etymology comes from. And in fact, there was a Pope called Basil II, I beg your pardon, Emperor Basil II. He was Porphyrogentius, provably traceable bloodline to the Porphyrogentius, the purple born, which we shall get into. And of course, he takes same route for the obvious reason. Here we have St. Michael slaying the dragon in a very interesting depiction. I just absolutely adore this one. Now, if anyone's seen Lecture 2, notice all the clouds. We'll get into why you find lots and lots of clouds normally in dragon depictions. But in this depiction of St. Michael slaying the dragon, we begin to see the half-human, half-serpent or dragon likeness. Okay, I love this one. Very beautifully depicted. And again here, same thing. We begin to see this half serpent, half human body. And this is a picture which is called Jupiter Seduces Olympia. Or it's actually in other pictures done by other artists referenced as the rape of Semele. So it is actually, this woman doesn't look like she's wanting whatever is coming her way. But basically, there's a few interesting things to notice here. You can always tell that this is Jupiter or Zeus because of the lightning bolts, okay, and the eagle, erroneously associated with Jupiter and Zeus, which is why the Roman eagle, the double-headed eagle, and you find the eagle on the double-headed eagle on the Freemasons books, Morals and Dogma. So there's a reason why the eagle and why it turns up on the American flag, because it's erroneously associated with this guy. Jupiter. Jupiter was the Roman incarnation of the original Greek god of Zeus, which also took on the name of Jehovah. Okay, now there is no J in the Italian language. They don't, for example, you won't find John in Italian, you find Gianni. Johnny isn't in Italian. It will be with a G, like Gianni, Gianni, as opposed to Johnny. So Jehovah is actually Jehovah, and I'm sure you've heard of Jehovah's Witnesses. Just to give you an example of where we're going with this and how words transliterate through various languages. So again, please do notice where we're going as well with this particular theming and allegory, half human, half serpent, and these things turn up everywhere. This particular painting is by Giulio Romano from around the 16th century. So you know, they're painting these beautiful pictures of this sort of stuff back then. What are they trying to tell us, and what clues were they leaving behind for us? Again, we see this coming up in very, very famous artworks, such as the roof of the Sistine Chapel, one of the most beautiful painting artworks, masterpieces in the world. And of course, that was painted by Michelangelo. And this particular depiction of the fall of man shows a very interestingly done half human, half serpent wrapped around the tree. Just so stunning. And of course, the half human, half serpent form is symbolic of metamorphosis. Dragons have been described as zoomorphic. Now, zoo referring to animal, for example, zodiac refers to animal wheel, zo being animal and diac being wheel or circle. That's where you get the word disc from. So zoomorphic, and morph obviously to change shape, and that, as we say, animals that can change shape. That's where we get the word metamorphosis from. Now, it comes across in every culture, this half human, half serpent shaping. This particular one is very interesting, actually. And if I may just grab my Encyclopedia of Mythology, and I'll show you all over here. It happens to be on the back of this particular very old battered book, which I keep referring to. The same picture. This is a different painting. The one we have on the screen itself shows you the Hindu maidens who are actually half serpents, and that's Vishnu dancing on the head of the serpent. But very interesting that throughout even the most far-flung cultures and religions of the world, there is constantly recurring theme of half human, half serpent beings represented in a state of either they are turning from one to the other, or they're half one, half the other. But there's definitely something being represented there, and I think it's possibly the metamorphosis between states. But as I say, this picture that you see actually turns up on the back of the Encyclopedia of Mythology. This I picked up 20 years ago at a secondhand bookstore on my college campus, and it in turn was written in the 1960s. So, this stuff is not new pseudoscience of, sort of people who have no life and only read day but night. It's everywhere. This information has been around for a long time. It's just really been up to us to put it together and interpret it correctly so that it makes sense in a continuation of things, as opposed to being compartmentalized and relegated under limited labels, which ultimately limit the idea you can have of something. Now, this is a picture of the north part of the frieze of the Pergamon. It's the remains of a marble frieze, and you can see here a human body with the legs of a serpent, that common theme again. Part of the decorative feature on the great altar of the Pergamon, which is at least 2,500 years old. This came out of ancient Turkey. And again, we see reoccurring theme of the half human, half serpent. The great altar of the Pergamon originates from Bergama, Izmir province in Turkey, and is now located at the Pergamon Museum in Berlin, Italy. Berlin in Germany. And this is part of the loot that was captured by the Nazis and made home in Germany as part of the Holy Roman Empire. But anyway, this altar was dedicated to Zeus and was referred to by John of Patmos as Satan's throne. All right, going into Greek mythology, the founder of the city of Thebes, one of my favorite cities in Greek mythology, a famous city, and the Theban priesthood, the actual symbol of the Theban priesthood is in fact a golden cobra. Cadmus and Harmonia, or Hermione, is a myth, or what we typically call a myth or a legend from ancient Greece, and you can go and Google it and read all about it. But basically, Cadmus is actually credited as being the founder of the sacred city of Thebes. We're talking obviously about the one in ancient Greece known as the City of Seven Gates. The one in Egypt is different and is known as different because it's not known as the City of Seven Gates. Specifically refer to the one in Greece as the City of Seven Gates. Number 7 coming up again, always. Typhon. Typhon is a Greek deity often referred to as a monster and the most feared out of all the deities of ancient Greece. Now, interesting to notice Typhon here with, again, serpent legs, okay, wings, same thing, appearance of the Phrygian cat, which appears on some depictions of Mithra, it appears on Santa Claus, it appears on an American Army flag, interestingly enough, from the 1800s, but more about that later. But basically, there's something very interesting to notice about the name Typhon, and that is actually the serpentine etymology decoded backwards, Ophi. O, that phi, PH, was actually in the Greek language known as phi, and it was one symbol, which basically would go round like that with a line through it. And that would be the combination of these two. So if you can imagine that as three letters, O, phi, and Y, and that was actually Ophi backwards. You can see the Ophi word in there backwards. Now, Latin often is said to be some of this interesting hidden Ophidian language backwards, and this is a perfect example. The most evil and most feared of the deities, the name is decoded backwards here. All right, we are jumping all over the world tonight, and over back into China again. You start looking at some more legends, not just the dragon legends, but the different other creatures which kind of turn up. And this is Lady Whitesnake, which is such an old legend that it originated in oral folklore before there were any written traditions and texts about it, and has caught and captivated the imagination of many people, again over the years, being reinterpreted into operas and animated pieces. This is typically, again, what was being referenced in the previous picture, just the head of a human with the body of a snake. This sort of thing turning up in all different cultures from all over the world. Nuwa and Fuzi. Here we start to see some reoccurring themes again. This is Chinese folklore. Let's look at some of the reoccurring themes which are interesting to note. The two circles, most likely, one is the sun, one is the moon. They are standing on a circle, normally a cosmic egg or a moon or a sun or something. This looks to be like constellations joined together. Okay, there's little stars, as you can see around here, which most likely references these circle of the zodiac, which you typically see around Phanes or Mithra. And again, spiraling serpents. Could think of the caduceus of the medical symbol, and I'll get into the etymology of spiral in a bit. But these two guys as well, credited with being the creators of humanity, as well as inventing hunting, fishing, cooking, and writing. And why writing is important will become important in part 2, but also hunting, fishing, and cooking. Okay, that becomes important when we start getting into ritual and you start understanding how humanity has been forced to change their diet into eating meat. We're not natural meat eaters. Our bodies are not naturally designed to digest big quantities of meat, but this is kind of given to us through the dragon culture that we've inherited. The Naga couple. This is a very old, thousands of years old as well, comes up in various depictions in India and that part of the world. This particular sculpture comes from Halebidu. And Naga basically means serpent-like god or dragon, and it's a Sanskrit or Pali word. And the Na of Naga forms the root of snake. So S would go before there. It shares the same root. So if you can imagine snug, okay, and that B and E, it's a simple transliteration. Queen Melusine is quite literally my favorite part of dragon etymology and serpentine symbolism, because there's so much to her, from her name, the names of her sisters and how they've transliterated. There's a lot of depth to Melusine, and I will cover her off in an entire, devote an entire lecture to her. This is a particular illustration from Jean de Arras, and it came from the 15th century. So you can see how old some of his depictions are. But again, here you can see the long serpent-like tail, the wings, and the crown on the head. And Melusine was queen of the Anjouvian dynasty. And Anjou actually is actually a word which was used for angel, the root word for angel, which will become important in part 2. And Melusine spawned the Anjouvian dynasty, which was said to be an unspeakably cruel bunch of royals. And Melusine was commonly referenced by her having scaly legs or being half serpent from the waist down, with the ability to change shape between human and dragon. Melusine is often depicted with her tail split into two and with one of her tails in each hand, often with a crown. Melusine was referenced as a mermaid or a siren. Now, a mermaid would be what we interpreted it as in English. La sirène is actually the French way of saying mermaid, and Gorgono is the Greek way of saying mermaid, and that's Gorgon, where it's where you get Medusa from, and we'll get into Gorgon at another time. So this is where Melusine turns up on the Starbucks logo, much like the Bicyon gets hidden in the Alfa Romeo logo. Melusine turns up in the Starbucks coffee logo, and you see dragon symbolism absolutely everywhere, and you don't even know what you're looking at. You don't even realize what it's referencing most of the time, and it slips past the perception of most people whilst being hidden in plain sight. Think about that next time you buy a coffee from Starbucks. Now, what's interesting is a descendant directly from the Angevin dynasty and the bloodline of Melusine is this guy here, Vlad III, also known as Vlad Tepes or Vlad the Impaler or Vlad Dracula. And he was named Dracula on account of his membership to the Order of the Dragon. And this guy is actually what Bram Stoker based his novel Dracula on. And it's basically based on this guy here, Vlad III. Now, Queen Elizabeth II is a descendant of the Angevin dynasty, and she is also descended from Vlad the Impaler through Mary of Teck, who married into what became the British family. And David Icke has kind of brought this information forward with some very palpable and tangible evidence. And a lot of people think it's crazy. And this is normally where we lose people, is when we start saying, oh, the Queen's a reptilian, Queen's a dragon. But, you know, the reality is we just can't ignore how many things point in that direction. For example, this really interesting 16th century portrait of Queen Elizabeth I. Now, this painting is of the Virgin Queen, supposedly a virgin, which has been on display in the National Portrait Gallery in London since 1921. And it's revealed a great secret due to its deterioration. You can actually see it here. Just vaguely through the hands, there is something appearing from underneath the paint. And if we go to the next painting, you can actually see what it looks like now with the deterioration, what it would have looked like before it was painted over. And you can see that the white flowers have faded. Over here, some leaves were added. And you've basically got the tail, which has started to show through whatever paint was put over it at a later stage. Very clear. And I bet if you actually go up close, you could probably feel the whole thing. I've done oil painting. I know how these things tend to shine through at the bottom. But yeah, very interesting to notice that the Queen is holding a snake. And you've got to ask yourself, why was the Queen holding a snake? What is the purpose of it? You know, have you ever seen the Queen in public holding snakes? You know, you've seen them holding flowers and, you know, obviously trying to say something. Nothing is for no reason. So here we get into the etymology, and we've already alluded and hinted to a little bit of this along the way. And etymology, for me, what it does, it helps to deconstruct language and words to their source root meaning. So we understand what these words really mean, because often we are taught that words mean one thing when actually they probably mean something completely different, and we're putting spells on ourselves that we don't even know we're putting on ourselves because we're saying these words thinking and we have good intentions, or that we're creating certain things when we actually could be doing ourselves a lot of damage, and the world around us for that matter. So dragon and serpentine etymology. Let me take you through the basics up front. The first ones, the most important column root, which I beg your pardon, the Ophi root, which I think really needs to be established up front, is the one that for me jumps out quite a lot in the names of some of the Greek characters that come up as gods of the pantheon. And really, it starts with the OR root, or, and that comes up a lot in Gorgon, Orf, Orphi, and then it starts to disappear. The R disappears, and then you just got the O and the Phi sound. So the Ophi, which then transliterates to Y and E. And as I said, that's a serpent or dragon root word. Now, metamorphosis is a good example of where they start to get sneaky with this, okay? Because have a look at this. You've got the serpent root word hidden into the word metamorphosis, and we understand the word metamorphosis to mean a physical change. But dragons have been documented to change shape completely, to change from one being to another. It's been documented and referred to as shape-shifting. That's the buzzword that's been applied to it in recent times. But how sneaky that they put the serpent word into the process of shape-shifting. Does that not indicate that, for me, when I realized that the serpent root word is a metamorphosis, this is when I realized, oh wow, this stuff is real. Because I've always known the word metamorphosis, I've always known what it meant, but we didn't know what the allegory or the root of it was from. And it most clearly is from the changing of shape from one thing to another. And that is quite clearly a dragon trait. Okay, Porphyrogentius. Lovely word. Porphyrogentius is basically, the official meaning is purple born, which is supposed to indicate that you were born in the royal bedchamber, which is usually purple, a very special color reserved only for royalty. Purple has the highest vibrational frequency. And the one thing you have to realize, what is it all about? What is the purpose of all of this control of humanity? It's about the harnessing and manipulation of energy. So being born into purple maximizes that, the high vibrational frequency and that high manipulative frequency of energy. Okay, so Porphyrogentius means being born into the ruling basileus, the reigning king or emperor who is usually of the dragon bloodline. And that's why I always reference anything to do with a dragon in purple. It has been historically documented that royalty are obsessed with bloodlines and they're very, very inbred. Royalty always marries royalty, and those born Porphyrogentius were married to other Porphyrogentius. In imperial diplomacy, Porphyrogentius brides were often sent to seal a bargain, basically the joining of lands or treaties or pacts, so that people could amalgamate their lands and gather more power. They're still doing this today. These are lovely old depictions. This is the baptism of Constantine in the royal purple chambers. Morpheus from Greek mythology was supposedly the god of dreams. And Morpheus is a character that appears in Ovid's Latin novel, Metamorphose. And you'll notice the serpent root word, O-R-P-H, Orph, over here. The Roman counterpart of Morpheus was Somnia, okay, because of course, first came the Greeks, then came the Romans, and Somnia was what became of Morpheus. And this is where you get the term insomnia. Bearing in mind, Morpheus was the god of dreams. So if you can't sleep, then you would have insomnia. Then there's Orpheus, and I've actually spelled this incorrectly, I beg your pardon. Orpheus is spelled O-R-P-H, okay? Orpheus was a musician, poet, and prophet in the Greek religions. And basically, supposedly the inventor of music, and said to be able to tame all wild animals with his lyre. And this is where the harp symbolism starts to come in. You see harps with angels, also the term harpy, which refers to the same dragon. We'll get into harpies at another time, but this thing here, very interesting. The harp turns up a lot. It's a commonly recurring symbolism that comes with the dragon and angels for a reason. And again, you start to see this Phrygian cap going on here. Important that it turns up a lot. All right, Sophia. Sophia is where you find, again, very interestingly enough, the serpent root word Ophi. And Sophia is the personification of wisdom. The iconoclast Sophia is revered by some mother goddess worship groups, but again, we start to notice some of the similar themes that come out here. The dove, which we will talk about in the second lecture, the clouds, and she's got 7 holy people next to her. You can see because they've got aureolas around them, 7 of them, and 7 steps, 7 columns. Now, the columns are important. This whole thing is just absolutely littered in symbolism. Okay, this is Ophiuchus, the serpent bearer. Now, Ophiuchus is the constellation that basically is the 13th astrological sign of the Hermetic zodiac, and it is in fact the hidden sign, much like 13 is thought to be bad luck. You'd often find a house numbered as 12A rather than 13 because 13 is normally hidden. And Ophiuchus bears this serpent root word again, and the constellation of Ophiuchus. Ophiuchus is actually known as the serpent holder or serpent bearer, and this is the constellation of serpents, which is divided into serpens caput, which is the head, and serpens cauda, which makes up the tail. And although it has 2 different names, it's actually one constellation. The Ophi word turns up in the word philosopher, philosophy. And here's where we start to get onto the or, because when you start to look at where or turns up, it gets a little interesting, okay? Origin, orientation, oriental, order, world, word, sword, story, horn, porn and pornography, horny, orgy, orgasm, organ, orphan, north, orthodox, Mormon, Ouroboros, court, mortal and immortal, George, oracle, oral, Morgan and Morgana, Gorgon, ogre, orc or orcus, worship, whore, war, and of course that starts to transliterate into arch, arch, archer, archangel, etc. Why is it important to get into etymology and understand all of this? Because words are magic. All words in language, written or spoken, have power. Word spells are created when we are taught at school to spell words. These programs are created within our psyche and interwoven into the very fabric of our existence to tie us into certain Ophidian patterns, serpentine patterns. To write is to perform a rite. Now look at how similar these words are, write and write. To write is to perform a rite or ritual, which is why we are taught to write in cursive in order to curse ourselves and others. The creative power of sound. Cymatics is the visual expression of how particles attune to sound frequencies. Now, these depictions over here are different depictions of fine particles of sand being put onto a plate whilst different sound and vibrational frequencies are played through. And these are the various depictions, I beg your pardon, patterns that are formed by these particles of sand with various sounds playing through these plates, showing us that the expression of sound frequencies can be demonstrated in a visual form. And I myself have actually seen this when I went to the Breakthrough Energy Movement Conference in 2012. Fernando Vossa played sound frequencies into a ball, of a glass ball containing water. And in this water, we actually saw the sound frequencies becoming light. I saw sound become light. We could see sound. And this is an example of exactly how we can see what sound would look like. Not just a thing we can hear. This is a visual representation. This is what sound looks like. So sound is creative. This demonstrates exactly how different sounds are capable of creation and manifestation, a key part of ritual, spell, and of course, our entire being. Serpentine spell. Every character of the alphabet has a value and meaning other than what we are taught. Sentences are constructed in a specific way to trap us into a specific serpentine spell, really through the way in which we are taught to think. We are taught how to think through the way we are taught how to speak. We think in the words we speak in most of the time. So let's go back to the very beginning, okay? And in the beginning was the Word. And the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So what is God? And if the Word was God, what was the Word? Now, I actually broke this down further because for me, it wasn't God and then the Word. It was, for me, the initial creational spark. Then perhaps a thought, a fraction of separation, which then birthed another fraction of separation. But what was the intention of that thought? Because it's through the intention that we manifest action, and that action would then be the word, either spoken or written, which forms the basis of communication. And without communication, there's no manifestation. We couldn't create anything without communication of some form. And then, obviously, creation. So for me, it's God, thought, intention, action, word, either spoken or written, through communication, which then causes the manifestation and creation. Now, I will come back to all of these, actually 3 specific words I want to draw attention to here. Word, God, and John. These 3 will become very clear as we go through this. Writing is dead and spoken word is living. Now, to give you an example of this, as just demonstrated, or when I've spoke about cymatics, when you speak a word, there's life to it, there's vibrational frequency, there's creative manifestational quality to the sound, whatever you are putting out with live word. That's why oaths have to be said. Not very good and well signing a piece of paper, but written word is dead. Okay, so symbolically, what they do when they give you a certificate, they will stamp it with a seal, emboss it, to raise it, to give it a raised surface, which is in effect symbolically raising it from the dead, okay, to give it more life and more value. That's why certificates normally have a raised part. And this is why red wax seals are often used. The red wax of a seal is symbolic of blood, all right? And this is why they would seal or they'd put wax seals onto various decrees to give life to it. And they stamp the seal to give it a raised part. Okay, you can see the raised part there, which symbolically gives life to the dead manuscript, which is why magic spells often use seals and symbols in craft. If the word is God, now remember focusing on the word God, if the word is God, okay, what was the word God in other languages? So let's try and look at how this word God comes up quite a lot and what it was and where it feeds into and how it determines our language and what this entity is that we've become familiar with as God and how we reference him and how often we reference him with or it or them without even knowing. So God in its singular form is T-H-E, the or the. I beg your pardon, I've jumped back. It's the, T-H-E, the or the. And God's, as in the plural, is Theoi, T-H-O-I, Theoi. And of course, this turns up in the name of Athena. And Athena, of course, depicted in this lovely statue with her snake, which is actually supposedly her pet. And she also had a cloak, which was supposedly covered in serpents. And you'll see this a lot in ancient Greek art, painted onto various depictions of craters and stuff. And in fact, if you go check out theoi.com, come across quite a lot of this amazing art, which tells amazing stories that has been so well preserved. The Parthenon. The Parthenon is the temple of Athena and is actually in the city of Athens in Greece. And here you see the the root word turning up in the Parthenon and in Athena and in the surname Athena Parthenos. So very much giving indication to the godly quality that is being intended here, the godly allegory. And of course, this Parthenon has been used for many different things over the years. It was looted by the Romans, turned into a Catholic cathedral or Catholic church for a while, but very holy place. And there's a lot of amazing energy supposedly in Athens, which is why people there only need 6 hours sleep a night. Words using the root. I'm going to take you through a few here just to give an idea of where we're going to be going, because this is important. All right, so obviously the obvious ones, for example, like theology, monotheism, meaning the belief in one God, pantheism, the belief in many gods, pantheon, the home of the gods, Thebes, as we spoke about. Thebes existed both in Egypt as well as in Greece. And then theater. Now that's interesting because theater evolved out of ritual. And when we get into Greek theater and all of that, we'll talk a bit more about that. But obviously there's a lot of allegory when you start looking into things like scripts and writing and play and ritual. Amazing. Our entire modern day entertainment is rooted in ritual. And then, of course, thesaurus. Very interesting. The, root word, and sao, meaning light, and saurus, meaning lizard. So very interesting. And that, of course, refers to a dictionary of words in the entirety of its context, but has several roots hidden in there, which, of course, mask further allegory, which we'll go into in part 2. Just to finish off with these 4 words, which are very important because they play out some very, very interesting themes, all right? Theotokos, basically, is the offspring of the gods, the children of the gods, the people that came out of them, that were created by them, Theotokos. Hemithoi, hemi meaning half, for example, hemisphere, which is half of the sphere. Hemi, half, theoi, so half God, meaning maybe half God, half human. Therianthropy, meaning God and human, half God, half human perhaps, or the ability to change from God to human or from human to God. Interesting theme that. And theophania, which basically means the appearance of God out of seemingly nowhere or the disappearance. So an incarnate being suddenly disappearing or appearing out of seemingly thin air. That's what theophania refers to. Okay, guys, that was it. I think we will be taking you through to part 2 next. So we're just going to take a bit of a break. And yeah, don't go anywhere. Part 2 will be up shortly.
Each life we incarnate into has a divine purpose. For the majority of people on this planet, their purpose has eluded them. We have become so distracted with the struggle to survive that we have forgotten what we are here to do. In alignment with the sacred laws of nature, the ultimate purpose of all existence is to create and evolve. We certainly do not incarnate into life with the intention to destroy. And yet, we have come to live in a very destructive world. As a result, there are many out there who feel lost or adrift, whilst knowing deep down inside that something is very wrong with their reality. Many people wish they could do something of value, anything that is purposeful, instead of having to submit to a system of slavery in order to survive. It is important never to let go of that feeling. That is your soul crying out to you, telling you that your life has value and that you do indeed have a purpose. The most important thing you can do in life is to recognize your purpose, and often that requires a lot of soul searching. Life indeed dishes out some pretty tough challenges, which will either move you closer towards your purpose path, or will give you great training for when you finally realize what it is that you came here to do. But more often than not, the very clues about your life's purpose are hidden in plain sight, woven into the very fabric of our existence. But we are so easily distracted by irrelevant details that don't really matter, that often we miss the very obvious right in front of us. It is because of our willful ignorance of anything that does not fit our preconceived ideas that the truth about the nature of our reality is so readily hidden in plain sight. This is a very deep and personal journey, which has come to be expressed in many aspects throughout my life. This is not just an attempt to retell a bunch of research and pass it off as my own, for I am very grateful and openly acknowledge all the many wonderful people that I have been given the opportunity to work with and to learn from in order to get to the point where I've come to know what I now know. This is a journey I was always destined to go on, and likewise, how I have come to know this information forms as much a part of the story as the information itself.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back for part 2 of Dragonology, the Saturday evening, the 4th of April. Okay, picking up from where we left off before the break, with how we are controlled through our language. Through an examination of many symbols and languages across the world, it has become abundantly clear that in order to know the truth about the nature of our reality, it is essential to examine our language and to get a grasp of what it is we're actually saying and writing. Many commonly used words and expressions have meanings other than what we are taught or what we are aware of. Symbolic lexicons represented within words often mask hidden meanings. All languages have root words, which allude to the origin of said word, which have evolved from the original seed thought or intention. Symbolism. Symbolism, the use of symbols, is universal to all cultures. They're not just pictorial motifs. They're encoded into our language primarily through the mode and application of rhymes, synonyms, and homonyms as symbolic indicators. And I use the example of Cockney rhyming slang to demonstrate this. For example, in England, when I lived there, they had expressions such as, if you wanted to say, let me have a look, they would say, let me have a butcher's, as in, let me have a butcher's hook. That's what they're referring to. They would say, let me have a butcher's, meaning let me have a look, and look rhyming with hook. So there was an allegory there. Another common one, for example, would be, I'm going up the apples and pears. And what they're referring to was the stairs. I'm going up the stairs, but they would say, I'm going up the apples and pears. Now, in that particular example, you've got two things that I want to point out, which are illusory, symbolic, really. For example, you have synonyms. Apples and pears are synonymous with each other. Often the use of synonyms is very common in symbolic allegory, but rhymes as well. For example, pears matches with stairs or rhymes with stairs. So just to give you an idea of how they've done this, and if you take that very simple example of Cockney rhyming slang into example, it's a good template to start applying as we go through this, and you start to see how they've done this on a much larger scale. Symbols hide the dragon. The purpose of a sign, symbol, or synonym is to substitute the object with a symbolic counterpart. Adoption and use of symbols is universal to all cultures and are primarily used as a mechanism of subterfuge. In order to hide the truth about the existence of dragons, which is the very root of our very culture. Symbols and etymology. In order to grasp the full extent of just how multi-layered symbolism interconnects, it's important to cross-reference these symbols with some of the etymological roots of our language. When we talk about gods, or a god, rulers, or royalty, we are always referencing the dragons. And if I can ask you just to suspend any disbelief you might have at this point, and just assume for the moment that that is in fact the case, or at least for the context of this particular lecture, that is how we will be referencing gods, rulers, royalties. We're always referencing dragons. So gods, rulers, and royalty, taking us back to those four root words, just to run through them. Theotokos, offspring of the gods, royalty or dragons. Hemithoi, demigod, half god or human, half human. Theoryophy, I get stuck on this all the time. Theoryanthropy, the ability to change shape into human, and theophania, which of course is the sudden appearance of God out of nowhere, like a ghost, for example. So the, as mentioned already, is the gods, dragons, rulers, or royalty. The interconnection between dragons and royalty is expressed in several ancient languages. So we've already gone through the Greek etymon of this. Let's have a look at this and how this comes up again and again and again in other languages. So, it's not just me saying this, it actually is provable through other languages. And because it's so many different languages, we can't ignore the allegory that comes from it. For example, as already demonstrated in part 1, the interconnection between basilisk and basileus is demonstrated through the fact that basilisk is historically referenced or documented as being the king of serpents. And this is where you get the word basileus, which in the ancient Greek language is king. And now we get on to what I call root words or root word groupings. And this particular root word grouping, being pio, pala or pala, and para, are very interesting. And I'll take you through this and you'll see why. The Akkadian noun pio means snake. Pio relates to the Sanskrit title pala or pala, which means king. Pio, pala, and para all come from the same root, and they are an important serpentine word grouping and further reveal the dragon allegory interwoven into our languages through the root words and phrases. For example, here we start getting into, again, more allegory between dragons and rulers and royalty. In the word pharaoh, you have the word para as a root word from this triad root word grouping. And the pharaohs are always commonly depicted with a uraeus, a rearing cobra, on their foreheads. And of course, pala forms the root of the word palace, the residence of rulers and royalty. And this is a picture of Buckingham Palace in the courtyard where they do the changing of the guards. Notice this particular style of architecture, which has got that particular triangle there with the columns coming down, because when we get into further lectures, I'll get on to explain exactly what Ophidian architecture is all about. The Garden of Eden is the origin of the concept of paradise, okay? And this is also where you find this lovely root word paradise. So the word paradise basically evolved out of the concept of the Edenic myth. And this is a picture by Lucas Cranach the Elder, who was initiated into a secret society. And after a certain date, he only signed his paintings with a black-winged dragon wearing a crown, holding a ruby ring. We'll get into that a bit more, but look at this little character over here, which is a half human, half serpent being. And notice, I think that's a UFO up there. Not terribly sure, but anyway. So the word para turns up in some very interesting places, even when you start to reference the language itself and the structure of language. So if you control how language is structured by actually labeling language with serpentine root words, how controlled is our language? Very controlled. For example, parable refers to stories told largely in symbolic allegory, paragraph, and paraphrase. Oh dear. I think I have, there we go. Para and parlay. Now, parlay comes from the root of para. Okay. Para is a root word of the Indo-European expression of parle, meaning to speak. When a pirate is captured, he has the right to declare parle, which is the temporary protection until the captured party has an audience with the captain of the ship. And it's the code of parle. If you declare parle, means they can't kill you. You have to be taken directly to the captain and have an audience with the captain. But basically, parler means to speak. That's what it also means in French. Now, para and narra are etymologically similar. As you can see, they transliterate. The word for narrate is taken from the Latin stem narra, meaning to tell. The word Nara and Naga are etymologically similar. Naga is a serpent or dragon common in legends of countries largely of the East, such as Thailand, Cambodia, Philippines, Indonesia, Java. Another classification of the dragon is known as the Ifrit. This is the Arabic classification for a malevolent demon or dragon, also written as Ifrit, Afrit, Ifrit. Actually, I postulate that this is in fact the root of the name of Africa, Afrite, just FYI. Anyway, Ifrit in this particular expression is the Arabic classification for malevolent demon or dragon and forms the root, word root. Ifrit forms the root of rite, ritual, and of course, write as in write with a pen or with a keyboard, for example. So what do you call the Hebrew language in Hebrew? This is where it gets interesting. Judaic law equates the word Ifrit with writing, and the modern Hebrew language is referred to as Ivrit in Hebrew. So the modern Hebrew language actually references Hebrew as Ivrit with the rit root. Ritual, rite, Ifrit, Ivrit, the Hebrew language. Interesting. Ifrit alludes to the Arabic verbal stem irif, meaning to know or to have knowledge. The Latin word for brotherhood is fraternitas and is derived from the Ifrit root. The Ifrit's existence is concealed by the fraternity. And of course, this is a scene from Eyes Wide Shut, for those of you who have seen it. If you haven't, go see it. The Arabic word shaitani, which means Satan, parallels with the adjective shatir, meaning wise. And of course, as we already spoke about, Sophia is supposed to be the personification of wisdom and, of course, contains a root word here. To know, be wise, or intelligent. Okay? And of course, this is a statue of the goddess Sophia outside a library, which is very interesting. That's outside a library. And this is actually ruins of a library in the ruined city of Ephesus in Turkey. And I was talking about earlier, the phi sign, which is the PH, is actually the circle with a line through it. And you can see it very clearly over here. That is what the phi would have looked like. Be wise like serpents. Again, we see the pattern of the Arabic verb kafa, meaning to know, is cognizant with afa, meaning viper in the Middle Eastern languages. Scolex is the Greek word which means worm. And the word worm came from the Old English word worm with a U, which means a serpent, snake, or reptile. Scolex corresponds with the Latin word schola, which means a lecture, sect, or followers. And scholar then evolved into the English word. A synonym for a good scholar would be a genius. And the words gene, genius, and genie all stem from the word gen. And of course, gen is the old Semitic word for jinn, or jinn with a J. And the DJ, j, that sound, is actually represented in hieroglyphics with a cobra, or a serpent, or a snake. So the jinn, which are dragons, come from pre-Islamic Arabic history and actually do turn up in Arabic Islamic history as well. And they're frequently mentioned in the Quran. I reference here the 72nd surah is entitled Surat al-Jinn. Now, surah means verse, so surat means verses of the jinn. Now, L refers to something very interesting. We'll get into the L a little bit later, but I mentioned in the first section, I'll do it again as an example. Muhammad al-Fayed was actually called Muhammad Fayed, and he put the L before the Fayed because he claims that he's descended from Egyptian royalty, and this entitles him to use the L Fayed. So this basically is verses of the royal jinn, or holy jinn, or sacred jinn, whatever the L is referencing here, but you'd normally find that before something that's royal. Jinn is the root words of words such as origin, as we've already spoken about, the or root word there, of course. So there's two serpent root words in origin. Interesting, because the creational myths come to mind again. Genesis, genealogy, generation. It's painting a much bigger picture here. And of course, green, which comes from this root, and jinn, as in the game and the alcoholic spirit. Patterns and connections between dragons and words. The pattern is then repeated in the wordplay between the Arabic word surah, as we just mentioned, which means verse, and the Greek word soros, meaning reptile, because soros and surah are very similar. So verse and reptile, and surah and soros, interplay of those words. It's repeated over and over again. And we have to bring in the third element here, which repeats over with this particular thread of wordplay, which happens to be light. The light theme interconnects into dragons and language here at this particular juncture. Surah and soros is rooted in the Semitic root word of sau, meaning light. For example, Saudi Arabia. And the Sau then goes into the Sodi, or Saudi becomes Sodi, as in the Sodi priesthood, and sodomy and sodomites and all of that. We'll get into that in lecture 3. So let there be light. The word Lucifer stems from the Latin term or expression lux fer, meaning light bringer. Light and language. The word Lucifer is etymologically linked to lesefer, meaning to tell. Now think of this, when we talk about you enlighten somebody, you tell them something. Okay? All the same root etymology, same meaning. The words Lucifer and lesefer share an etymological root with the word sefer, meaning book, and sofer, meaning a writer or a scribe. And this brings us all the way back here. Sofer is etymologically linked to Sophia, the personification of wisdom, and philosopher and philosophy, as we've already dealt with. Again, serpent root words turning up here. This is where it starts to get interesting as well, because when you start looking at how they completely ingrain the serpent etymology into the names of sacred places, it tells you exactly what these places were and what they were in homage to. For example, the Hagia Sophia, one of the oldest buildings of its kind, which is in Istanbul in Turkey, and I have been to Istanbul several times, including on my honeymoon. And this building basically is known in Latin as the Sancta Sapientia, okay? Sancta Sapientia. In Latin, serpens and serpent, beg your pardon, in Latin, serpens, meaning serpent, is etymologically similar to sapiens. So serpens and sapiens, which basically sapiens is supposed to mean intelligent. However, I have found some Latin translations, and I've jumped again. I have found some Latin translations where sapiens actually means serpent. So again, we have this whole thing of intelligence and knowledge is interlinked with the word of serpent. And then the first word of the English expression of the name of this particular building. This is the inside of the Hagia Sophia. And Hagia, which would be written as A-Y-A in Turkish, but in English, in the English expression, Hagia is etymologically similar to Haya, which means snake. This is the Arabic, which means snake. And we start to get onto another root here, which becomes very evident, and I'll take you through this. For example, the collu root. In Latin, the analogy between snake and dove or bird is encoded etymologically into the similarity between coluber, meaning snake, and columba, meaning dove. This brings us onto this particular group root word that we need to look at, this root word grouping of kolu, kolo, kulu, kula, kala, and kali. Now, kolu obviously forms the root of column, and here's a dragon wrapped around a column inside, and the royalty theme comes up. Column inside the Shenyang Imperial Palace, pala root word. Always the same things coming up again and again. Words from the same root are colon. Okay, so colon is actually an organ inside the human body. The colon is part of your intestines, and it's the organ in your body that looks the most like a serpent, ironically enough. This is what we call the colon in Barcelona. It's a monument in Barcelona, right at the bottom of the La Rambla, the walkway. And much like Nelson's column in Trafalgar Square, it is also surrounded by lions. Lions are normally a symbol of the sun, and sun allegory masks the dragon. So it's all the same sort of thing coming up again. And this column is basically dedicated to colonization. That's why it's called colon, because it refers to colonization. So taking you through these words, we have a column. For example, if you write a column, again, writing comes up into this theme again. You write a column in a newspaper, in a magazine. And here, colon becomes colony, colonial, colloquial, again, referring to language, colloquialism in words. Cloud. As I spoke of earlier, clouds are a symbol of the dragon, used in artworks to mark the dragon. Color, college, getting into indoctrination, and knowledge, rhyming with college, as we've already spoken about wisdom and enlightenment. Okay, this is a picture of the city of Cologne in Italy. And of course, the root of colo lends itself to Cologne, Colombier, which is in France, Colorado, Columbia, and Columbine. People may have heard of the Columbine schools where those kids walked in with machine guns and shot a whole bunch of their classmates, absolutely convinced they were MK Ultra kids. And the reason the school was chosen is, in fact, because it was called Columbine. And California, the Kali root, of course, coming up in Kali Yuga cycles, and of course the god Kali as well. Columbia. Columbia, obviously, the depiction of Columbia TriStar Pictures. Here we have lots of clouds, again, light on a pyramid, and this Columbia depiction is archetypal of a mother goddess figure and often referenced as Venus Columba. And Christopher Columbus as well. Here we have the red cross again. It always comes up in the most erroneous places associated with dragons. But Christopher Columbus's real name was Christopher Collins, and they claim that he supposedly discovered America by accident. But he didn't discover America because America had been, how can you discover a place when there were already people living there? There were people living there long before Columbus got there, and there were people that traveled there from the old world, supposedly. In fact, just in the last week, we've heard that there have been Roman coins found in America, showing that there were people long before Columbus. But what this really is about is telling the people that came in the future, who were secret society initiates, that this was a rewriting of history, and it's encoded into the name Columbus because that's what these people used to do. They rewrote history. And Columbus knew exactly where he was going because he was given the maps by Henry the Navigator, who was also a secret society initiate. So Columbus is the name used so that secret society initiates would understand the code of colonization. Dracula, the story of Dracula, written by Freemason Bram Stoker. Have a look. The Kula root turns up in Dracula, ironically enough. And of course, as we already spoke about, Bram Stoker based this novel on the story of Vlad III, or it was supposedly loosely based on this guy, Vlad the Impaler. Columba, which means dragon. Okay, I beg your pardon. Columba, which means dove, is interesting because doves in Christianic mythology, or dragonology as I should say, are often referenced. This is the Holy Spirit window in the Vatican. Often referenced, doves are the Holy Spirit or the Holy Ghost. This gets interesting because you start to see the etymology of spirit and ghost turns from the dragon as well. So spirit, the word spirit originates in the word spiro, which comes from the word, which is meaning of dragon. Spiro means dragon. And Spiro, I beg your pardon, turns up in the word spirit, meaning the alcoholic spirit, along with gin. So this gets looped into this theme as well. And alcohol has for thousands of years been used in rituals for invocations, possessions, and communications with external entities through intoxication. I mean, there's so many different alcoholic spirits we can think of that have been created by monks, for example, Fra Angelico. I can think of stories, for example, Jägermeister was supposedly, there's a holy story behind how that was created. So there's a lot of this kind of allegory going on. And of course, Spiro forms the root of spiral. You can see here, spiral, sprite, spook, spy, and spit. Spirals turn up on the top of columns very often. This is the Ionic style of Greek architecture. But basically, this serpentine architecture was really to lock down the Ophidian vibration, which is part of the matrix that we're in. And again, doubling up. It's doubling up on the serpent allegory because columns, obviously the kolu root comes from dragons, and spiro being the dragon root as well. The use of sacred geometry and spirals and columns is prevalent in buildings and temples or sacred places. And this, of course, locks down the Ophidian vibration, of course, the Ophi root word in Ophidian. And the Ophidian vibration is a term commonly coined by Aleister Crowley when referring to this specific vibration, which, keeps everything in fear. So spiro is also the root of sprite. Sprites a bit like dragons or goblins or fairies, and it's considered to be a creature relegated to folklore or fairy tale. Spirit and spook are often referenced as ghosts, okay? And we'll come back to this little guy here, this picture of Pan having sex with a goat, because it becomes very interesting. Goat worship has allegory too, but when we reference good and God, it's the same sort of reference as referencing evil and devil, because the word evil sits in the word devil. Okay, just as there's a similarity between good and God, which evolved into goat, which transliterates into ghost, where you can see you get the word host. You can see the word go comes from ghost, gone, and dragon. So gone as in suddenly they're here and then they're gone, like theophania. Go as in to disappear. Host as in possession, what alcohol can be used for. The host theme comes up quite a lot as we go into further etymology, and I'll point that out at a later time. But we'll get into that a bit more. All right, phantom. Phantom comes from the root word phanes, and I spoke about earlier how similar phanes and Mithra looks. Let's take a look at them. Just like Mithra, Phanes has wings and is wrapped in a serpent. Phanes is depicted here with cloven hooves and emerging out of a cosmic egg. And of course, this would be the constellation, the zodiac, also a bit of a cosmic egg shape. I beg your pardon, I jumped again. Cosmic egg shape, but he's got a serpent coming out there, and there's a cosmic egg over there. This is hatched out of the cosmic egg. But phantom comes from the root word phanes, and phanes is a god of the Greek pantheon. Okay, there's the the again. Theophania, as we've spoken about several times now. Theophania is a Greek word for theophany, and theophany means the appearance of God out of seemingly nowhere. And as we've spoken about in this context, when referencing gods, we're talking about the dragons. And this picture, what do we see? The theophania of the Lord, and it's actually showing us here a dove, which we've already spoken about, is referred to as Kaluba. So the phane root word is etymologically cognitive with two other very interesting words, okay? Pheme and phane. Let's have a look at those. First off, pheme. Pheme is a goddess of the Greek pantheon and is the personification of fame. The word fame transliterated from the word pheme. And you can see Pheme is depicted here with wings and also standing on a ball, all the similar themes that we tend to get. And then Fae, also depicted with wings, with a solar or halo around the head, or holy or sacred. But Fae are also known as fairies or fair folk. Okay, fair comes from this particular root word as well. Then fair is etymologically similar to pair, as in not one, but two, a pair, a twinning. Okay, and of course the fruit known as a pear. And pears turn up in so many different heraldic depictions that you've got to wonder, what are they trying to reference? And really a pear is a symbolic representation of the serpent or the dragon. They mask the dragon. The caduceus, which is the symbol of the medical and pharmaceutical industry, is formed from a pair of spiraling serpents. And again, this allegory repeats and repeats over and over again. You can't escape it. All the same words and all the same symbolism turn up again and again. As I spoke about earlier, the Cockney rhyming slang or synonyms of apples and pears, inextricably linked, apples and pears, apples and pears. The word pear is cognizant with the word pior. They transliterate from each other, and the word pior is the Akkadian word for snake. Snakes and apples. Where have I heard that one before? Perhaps in the Edenic myth of paradise? Again, folks, we come back always. We always seem to come back to the story of Genesis. We've covered that word already, which is the origins, supposedly, of humanity. The Genesis where we were born, Homo sapien, was originated from in the Garden of Paradise. All this words tying together for a reason. We always come back to the creational myths. Even the name Eve evolved from serpent allegory. So let's look at how Eve evolved. Eve can be seen in the word Ava. Ava is a serpent word, which evolved from Ava, which can also be written with an E at the end here. So A-V-E, as in Avesbury. So Eve, Ava, which in turn came from Affe. For example, in Dutch, the V is said as an F sound. So V is in Dutch instead of V in the English. So Affe means viper in the Middle Eastern languages. And as already mentioned, Ava, here we go, Ave, as it is pronounced in this context, Ave Maria. Ava is cognizant with Ave Maria. Ave Maria is how the Virgin Mary is referenced in Spanish and sometimes Latin. And this Maria then brings us to the next step. We spoke just now about Saint Marina, bringing in the marine theme here, tying in together Mary, Marina, and Maria are all rooted in the Latin word mare and mer, which in turn reference the ocean or the sea, and dragons are inextricably linked with water and the water theme. Mer is the root word of mermaid, and Merovingian, which were the dragon bloodline. Now we come down to three very important root words, which are just transliterations of each other. And we start with El. El is the root word of Elohim. And this is William Blake's drawing of the Elohim. Notice the serpents turn up again, the wings on the human being or angel. El, Elohim, as mentioned in the Bible, is derived from the old Aramaic word meaning light. So, for example, El would form the root of electricity, and electricity is synonymous with light. El obviously goes into the root of very common words such as hello, which is one of the first things we say when we see people as a greeting. Elves, so elves, fairies, sprites, all synonymous with each other. 11, this is a word, a number that they absolutely love, the dragons. Elite, elect, and eel. Now, eel is a water snake, so water theme, so snake theme, but normally eels can give off electricity as well. So electricity comes into this as well, electric eels, and that's as water, electric water snake. That's written as L with a double E, eel. Very interesting. So angels, let's look at what angels are. This is where I get controversial because angels are dragons or demons, but people who read angel cards, this is what you're looking at. You're actually reading dragons. Angels, the El root is present in the names of the biblical angels, such as Gabriel, Azazel, Raphael, and Michael. There are several other angels, but those are the most important ones. El or Elo is the Hebrew abbreviation, is abbreviated in Hebrew as El and in Latin as Il. And Il is the root of words such as illuminate, again the light theme coming in, and Illuminati. And when you talk about you enlighten someone, you illuminate them. Okay, so that light theme coming in again, which of course is cognizant with Lucifer. And notice the all-seeing eye, which is inextricably linked with the Illuminati. It is the symbolism you always think of. When you think of Illuminati, this is normally what you think of, is the all-seeing eye. And of course, the all-seeing eye turns up in the hand of Fatima in the Arabic traditions, the Islamic traditions. Beg your pardon. Il transliterates into the Arabic El, evident in words such as Allah, which is etymologically similar to Pala, the root of Palestine. Occult. Occult, meaning that which is hidden, is cognizant with oculus, the Kulu root coming in here, and oculus obviously meaning eye. So occult, meaning that which is hidden, presumably hidden from sight, is cognizant with oculus, meaning eye. And of course, the eye symbol is ever so popular in this particular realm of information. And basically, the eye symbol is pretty much turning up everywhere. Okay, you see them here. Bear with me. You see them with the dragons, beg your pardon, in the wings of the heptagon angels. And just need to get my mouse to work here. It's not working very well. There we go, much better. And in biblical accounts, dragons were referenced as the watchers. So in the heptagon angels, which are heptagon being the angels with the 6 wings, also known as the seraphim, you would often find eyes in the wings. And this is an old mosaic. So someone went to a lot of effort to create this depiction if it's made out of individual little stone mosaics. This is a rune stone in Sweden, which depicts the Norse mythology, which we spoke about earlier. Thor, the mid-god serpent, Thor and his hammer and all of that. And here you can see 2 serpents intertwined. We always have a pair of serpents, often twisting or spiraling together, as these appear to do. And this is a rune stone. Notice we've got a cross on it. This is pre-Christian mythology. So very interesting. All these symbols seem to always be linked together. But basically, it's up to us to decipher the deception. The Semitic noun Nahash or Nakash, meaning serpent, shares the additional meaning to decipher. Nahash in its shortened form is written as NHSH and indicates the verb to deceive. Incidentally, the words deceive and decipher are from the same family of words. In conclusion of part 2, as can be seen through our exploration of dragonology, the evidence of the dragon exists in written codified form. But the more interesting theme that starts to emerge is the duplicitous nature of the dragon and how openly it's been recorded whilst concealing its existence. Dragons hide behind occult ritual, not wishing to be found, whilst embedding themselves symbolically into language. Indeed, the very essence of our language loans itself to symbolism, which can be deciphered to reveal the deception of the dragon and the control and influence interwoven into the very fabric of our existence through language, literature, art, architecture, music, theatre, sport, and many other popular cultural aspects. Right, guys, that is it for me. Tune in for the first edition of episode 3. That'll be next Thursday, the 9th of April at 4 p.m. New York time, 9 p.m. London time and Morocco time, 10 p.m. Central European and South African time, and I think at 6 p.m., I beg your pardon, 6 a.m. the next morning in Sydney. And if you've missed anything, all our shows are available in the CCN archive, so please do check out our website, consciousconsumernetwork.tv. And for those of you who may be interested in learning a little bit more about this subject, we are compiling the Illustrated Encyclopedia of Dragons called Dragonology, and it's about history. And as we know, history has been written about from the point of view of the dominant culture. And what we've tried to do is reconstruct as much of it as we can, looking at art, architecture, sculpture, literature, and language, not really looking at what we've been taught in schools, but going back and piecing it together through the clues that have been left behind for us to decipher. So, guys, if you can, please, some pledges and sponsorship for publication is absolutely required. We cannot fulfill this project without the help of those interested in learning more about it. And anybody interested in obviously donating to Conscious Consumer Network, you're welcome to go to our homepage and hit the red heart, and we'll take you through to our donations page. But for now, I'd like to thank you very much for tuning in, and thank you all for your interest and attention. It's always a pleasure to teach you all about my passion of dragons, and we look forward to seeing you for episode 3. This has been Mel V, coming to you live from CCN headquarters. You have a good evening.